In the winter of 2012, Complete Parachute Solutions and Performance Designs embarked on a journey 9,000 miles from home, pushing themselves and their gear off the tallest mountain in the world to test the limits of its capabilities.
This trip to Everest was a great way for us to celebrate our 30 years of business at Performance Designs, and also the 10-year anniversary of CPS, getting everybody together and working towards a common goal of getting up this big mountain and doing the jumps together was really quite something.
The team began in Tamil, Kathmandu, acclimating, sightseeing, and preparing equipment for the expedition. Tamil is a popular tourist destination and acts as the pre-base camp for mountaineers and trekkers alike.
Tamil's a very unique place. It is the central location for all the trekkers, climbers, and outfitters to meet. People spend usually 2 or 3 days in the city to, one, acclimate to the change in altitude. Tamil's at 4,500 feet elevation. And then 2, it's the place where you would source any last-minute equipment you need for your journey in the mountains.
From Kathmandu, the team flew into Lukla Airport in eastern Nepal to begin their journey. Lukla Airport is rated as the most dangerous in the world, with its short runway that ends facing the mountain. This is the team's initial entry into the Himalayas and their first glimpse of Mount Everest.
For a lot of people, the flight into Lukla is almost as exciting as the actual skydive itself. We're basically flying twin-turbine aircraft into a landing area that's about the size of an aircraft carrier. And having never landed on an aircraft carrier myself, I can only assume it's as close to that stress level as you could imagine. A very small area. There's no go-arounds allowed because of the airport being situated on the side of a mountain. So you're basically flying into a 1,200-foot concrete runway that you have to hit every time. And the excitement and the adrenaline, being able to see out the front of the airplane, which you don't usually get in commercial flights, that whole process just makes the flight in an incredibly exciting adventure.
After 2 hours of acclimating to the change in altitude, the team began their trek to Pak Ding. At dinner that evening, the Sherpas spoke of the Namche Steps, the hike up the hill to Ding Bo She, which would be the toughest 2 legs of the trip.
The first day of trekking is typically an eye-opening experience for the groups when we take them into the Himalaya. And that's basically for 2 reasons. The first is the altitude. For most people, having an opportunity to spend a considerable amount of time at 9,000 feet or higher, it's a new experience for them. So the idea that they're standing that high above sea level, it takes a little while to sink in. And what really causes that effect is the lower oxygen levels that we have up there. People aren't used to doing physical activities such as trekking or climbing with the lower oxygen levels, and it does create a bit of a challenge the first day. So we try to keep those treks to a short minimum, 2.5 hours with multiple stops along the way.
The porters have spent their entire lives playing and working in the mountains. To work on the mountain guiding as a Sherpa or working as a porter is a very respectful trade in the region. They undergo hours and hours of navigation, first aid, rescue, and mountaineering training. The Sherpas are the backbone of the mountain people.
The second day, the hike up to Namche Bazaar was Probably one of the more exhilarating parts of the trip.
The daunting hike up the Namche steps is as rigorous and challenging as the Sherpas said.
It was a very steep part of the trek, which gave you a lot of exposure up over the valley we had just trekked in from. It was very strenuous at the same time. You could tell that the altitude and the lack of oxygen was definitely playing a role on our physical ability to perform at these altitudes. It was my first insight to wow, this is really going to be a chore working up here.
The team arrived at Namche in multiple groups over a 2-hour time frame. First or last, everyone showed signs of wear from the trail and jubilation to be sitting at the Sherpa Lodge in Namche. This will be the team's home for the next 2 days, where they'll relax, feast, shop, and be merry. The city streets are crowded with tourists stepping over the piles of local souvenirs, mountaineering equipment, and supplies.
Namche Bazaar serves as the focal point of the Upper Himalaya. If there was a center of the universe up there, Namche Bazaar would be it. It's basically a staging point for all the groups to get together, acclimate for one last time, and it's also the first time you're acclimating above 10,000 feet. So the body experiences a major physiological transition above 10,000 feet in terms of the time it takes to acclimate and the effects in terms of altitude sickness, things that you might find affecting you at 11,500 feet will affect you a lot greater than they would at, say, 8,500 feet.
From Namche, the team will trek to Sayan Boshe airstrip. They quickly realize this will not be like a normal jump at the DZ back home.
After a rest in Namche Bazaar, we hiked up the hill to Sangboche airstrip. That was my first chance to actually see Everest, and it actually had to be pointed out to me because it was far out in the distance, didn't look as high as all the other peaks because the other peaks were closer. But we got to see it, and also got to see the airstrip. We actually walked past the airstrip up to the Panorama Hotel. And the airstrip was rather interesting. It must be 1,200 feet long, and it's a rock strip. I mean, it's big chunks of rock all over the place. I hate to think of bringing a porter in and out of there and having those rocks flying all over. But it was a great place. The hotel they were good accommodations, and we had a little celebration, blessing from a Buddhist monk outside for all the jumpers. I'm told that he was asking the mountain's permission for us to jump, and I guess the mountain must have said yes.
At the end of the blessing, everyone was presented with a kata for good luck. Oxygen expert Ted Atkins shared a few stories with the team and explained the story of the kata and its spiritual value, having powers well beyond the mountains of Nepal.
We chose equipment from all the partner companies at CPS. We brought along the military Javelin, the Special Operations Vector, and inside of both of those rigs we had the military Silhouette 300. The reason we chose the 300 was to simulate the weight of carrying the extra equipment that many of our customers do with the MS 360s. Instead of jumping the MS 360 and carrying extra items that we would have had to haul up the mountain, we chose to downsize the canopy to create a similar wing loading as we would with the MS 360 and the extra equipment.
After donning the parachute and oxygen equipment, the jumpers would make their way from the staging area to the helicopter. Although it was only a few hundred yards, the walk was very exhausting for the jumpers. The physical exertion at altitude and anxiety of the first jump made the event quite challenging.
The aircraft that we used for the Everest skydive operation was a Eurocopter B3. And the reason we elected to use the Eurocopter this year and to actually go rotor wing versus fixed wing was that on these high altitude expeditions, one of the most important aspects of the jump operation is the exit, is spotting the aircraft. Simply because we're working in a very remote region that doesn't have a lot of flat, stable ground. It's not like jumping out in a desert where if you land off, you have miles and miles of desert. If we land off, it could take us a half a day to get back to the airport. And with the Eurocopter, it allowed us to fine-tune our spots every time we went up there. And it also allowed for a more efficient turnaround. We were able to run 30 lifts in 3 days, whereas it would have taken us 2 weeks to do 30 lifts with the porter.
Exiting the helicopter was both entertaining and challenging due to the slow forward airspeed of the aircraft at 24,000 feet. The view they experienced was both incredible and overwhelming, seeing more peaks than the first-time jumper could ever appreciate. Landing at Sayan-Boshe was very deceiving for the jumpers. The airstrip itself had an 8% gradient running away from the mountaintop and is located at 12,284 feet MSL. One end of the airstrip is nestled into the side of the mountain, while the other end drops off abruptly into the valley, thousands of feet below.
The techniques used for landing were a little bit different at the high altitudes, but they were more on par with the difference between a no-wind day and a high-wind day. In a no-wind day, you tend to start your flare a little bit earlier, and you try to plane it off and let the speed bleed off, as opposed to trying to completely stop it. But it wasn't a really wild change or a large change from normal flare.
During the next evolution of air operations, the team conducted jumps into Amadablam Base Camp at 15,500 feet MSL. Jumpers would load the helicopter and fly up to the drop zone where they would debark and ready their equipment before continuing on to jump altitude. Although the landing area at base camp was much tighter than Sayan-Boshe airstrip, the team and equipment performed better than expected. All the jumpers were impressed with the performance of the canopies in flight, and the jumps into base camp established new records for the military canopies landing at high altitude.
The jumps into Amadablam Base Camp was the largest piece of success on the trip. Having our canopies perform very well landing at 15,000 feet MSL was a huge feather in our cap. We expected the canopies to perform well, but it's one of those things you could back into what you think is going to happen, but to actually go up there and have a first-hand knowledge of landing the parachute at 15,000 feet MSL is just huge credibility when we're dealing with customers and clients that are interested in those types of capabilities.
On the third day, the team conducted more jumps at Sayan-Boshe airstrip. This allowed CPS and PD to collect additional jump data to further validate their performance claims.
Data collection is accomplished by a small microcomputer that the jumper would wear. It consists of a battery, a microcomputer, and a storage device like an SD card type of thing you would put in a camera. When we collect the data from the load cell rigs, we have several steps involved for presenting. We collect the data, we display it in graph format like Excel or something like that. We look at the forces versus time. We take that data and we look at any live video that has been shot for this jump. We made it up with the graph data and we overlay the two so we have a nice presentation, a nice video. Someone can watch the live jump video and actually see the forces and altitude right on the screen at the same time. It makes it very understandable and enjoyable for the viewer.
The next few days, the team would trek to Mount Everest Base Camp, which proved to be very challenging. Along their journey, they would pass through landmarks such as the Kumjung Monastery and the Climbers Memorial on the way to Laboshe. The landscape and elevation had drastically changed. The length of the hikes became noticeably shorter, and the frequency of rest stops became more often. The final hike proved to be as demanding as anything the team previously experienced. The Sherpas were prepared to do whatever it took to get everyone to the top. The arrival to base camp was fulfilling and emotional for all.
Arriving at Everest Base Camp was It was very surreal. It was a very calm moment. You realize that, man, not many people in the world have done this before, and it's quite an accomplishment. And it was at that time, the whole trip, just the parachute jumps and the great performance on the landings, and then reaching base camp, how much we had accomplished. I mean, it was a really big success for the team.
Complete Parachute Solutions and Performance Designs were extremely pleased with the outcome of the expedition. The companies look forward to continuing their quest to expand the capabilities of their equipment and meet the needs of their customers.